How's it going, everyone? I'm Dylan, this is All You Can Board, and this is Sinister Motives. I finally got my hands on it. This came in to stock in Canada here in Winnipeg, I think on March 25th or something like that. I got the email saying you can pick this up on whatever that Friday was. And then literally the day before, I got an update email saying, actually, we've now been told we can't sell this till April 8th, so I had to wait a couple weeks, but we finally got our hands on. There are two brand new heroes that we're going to talk about. Today, we're going to be talking about Ghost Spider, and in the video that comes out tomorrow, we'll be talking about Spider-Man, the Miles Morales version. So these are two really cool heroes, and honestly, I've been very impressed with both of them, and I've even been a little surprised on sort of, which one I gravitated towards more than the other one, and also just my overall thoughts and experiences with them. You'll get some of that idea for each individual hero video that I do, and also I'll eventually do a full review on the expansion box, talk more about the comparisons between them at that point, as well as all the villains. That'll be coming out probably next week, and I need more time to actually work through all the campaign scenarios and play them multiple times and things like that, and actually beat them all. I haven't beat the entire campaign yet. I've just been testing these heroes to start. So today is Ghost Spider. Lots to talk about. This one is very much entrenched in the Spider-Verse and the Web Warriors. A lot of cool stuff. We're going to jump right in and start with, of course, the alter ego, which is Gwen Stacy. So Gwen Stacy has a recovery of 3, hit points of 10, hand size of 6. The action is choose to either shuffle Ticket to the Multiverse from your discard pile into your deck, or ready George Stacy. You can do this once per round. So it's an interesting action because it's so specifically tied to 2 cards. Generally, which one you're going to use is going to just be dependent, obviously, on which cards you've drawn to win. The first time I played with Ghost Spider, it turned out that George Stacy ended up being like the last card in my deck, or like second last card in my deck. And so, and I had Ticket to the Multiverse in my opening hand. So, in situations like that, you might just never have the option to ready George Stacy with this, or it might feel like I'm going to alter ego to heal, and really there's nothing else I can do with this ability. It's very situational. That being said, Ticket to the Multiverse, as we'll get into, isn't good just because of the ability that's on the card. It also gives you 2 wild resources, and being able to use that for wild resources and feel safe knowing that you can then use Gwen Stacy to get that back into your deck later to use it for its actual ability is actually really powerful. Keeping in mind that Ticket to the Multiverse is removed from the game when you use it, so once you've done that, really all you can use her ability for is to ready George Stacy, but at that point, hopefully you have him in play and you're able to do that. So it's an interesting ability, a bit situational, not super flashy or exciting compared to some of the other things we'll get into, but still good all around. Moving on to Ghost Spider, her stat line is pretty good at 1, 2, 3. Actually, that's really good. Forward attack defense. Her ability is Dizzying Reflexes. So the response here is after you resolve an interrupt or responsibility on an event specifically, ready Ghost Spider. You can do this once per phase. The reason this is such a good ability, and I've used it so many times, is because one, it makes her a great candidate for protection decks, which is what she comes set up with, because you can defend with her, and even though she'll be exhausted, you can potentially use an event to be able to ready her and still use her on your turn. That being said, that was the initial thing I thought I was going to be using it the most for, but a lot of the cards that you're going to want to pair with Ghost Spider as the responses to be able to do things have a condition on them in her hero set of cards that say when you use a basic ability, trigger this. Because you'll have defended and she'll be exhausted, you won't actually be able to use a basic ability, and those cards will actually be ineligible to be used. So you do have to get a little creative. You can't just always assume you can use her best cards to be able to get multiple turns with her. That being said, if she's already ready, you're going to get potentially 2 attacks for 2 each if you haven't built her up. That's 4 damage right there on top of whatever event cards you've played that has triggered it. So lots of really cool stuff. And again, it triggers on interrupts as well. You're gonna have tons of fun building decks to try to find the best way to combo this and get the most mileage out of Ghost Spider. But even just out of the core cards that came in this deck, I had a ton of fun with it, and it was honestly really, really powerful and really useful to get the most mileage out of the turns I was having with Ghost Spider. So all around, a really, really solid hero card. Again, the alter ego side may be a little bit lacking if those situations don't arise, but when they do arise, very, very powerful. Moving on, we have 3 copies of Ghost Kick. So as I was mentioning before, this is one of those triggers that goes off of the basic abilities. It's a 2-cost event. It is a hero response, so it does work with the basic power on the hero card. It says after Ghost Spider uses a basic power, deal 6 damage to an enemy, max 1 per basic power use. So again, you have to have used the basic power. you cannot have her already exhausted to trigger the ability here. But that being said, 6 damage for 2 on top of, let's say you used her basic attack, that's 2 damage plus the 6 here for 8, plus she readies again so you can use another 2 damage for 10. Really, for 2 cost and then 2 exhaustions with the hero card here, you're getting 10 damage on a turn. She has the potential to do these huge swings to the villain, or she can split some of these out across smaller minions and do the 6 damage to the villain as the big hit, for instance. Lots of mileage, really cheap card. I use this a ton in all the games that I played. I love my big damage dealing cards. This one is a little bit more restrictive than the ones we've seen because you have to have used a basic power, so you are going to run into situations where you have the hand to do it, you'd love to play it, but you can't find a way to unexhaust or to ready Ghost Spider to be able to use these cards, and they end up being dead. So it's by no means the best damage dealing cards we've seen in sort of the hero set of cards in decks, but that being said, it works really well, and for 2 costs, for 6 damage is just really, really solid. Next, we have Parental Guidance. Interesting card here, 0 cost event, strictly an alter ego action. 2 things: if George Stacy is in play, attach 1 event from your hand or discard pile face down to George Stacy. And if George Stacy is not in play, search your deck and discard pile for him and add him to your hand. So this is basically a way to just grab George Stacy from your deck for free, essentially just playing this very card to do it, or you're being able to attach 1 event from your hand without having to exhaust George Stacy. Again, we'll get to George Stacy after. His ability involves him exhausting to attach events to him. You can play those events as if they were in your hand. This is allowing you to attach an event without having to exhaust George Stacy, effectively being able to do 2 attachments that turn to get more mileage out of it, and you can pull from the discard pile as well, depending if there's a card you really like that's in there. So for 0 cost, it's really, really good. It is a little bit restrictive because you have to be an alter ego to be able to use it. You're not always going to have a hand at the right time to be able to get the most mileage of this card. I often use this as an energy resource just because it made more sense than trying to find a way to get to alter ego to use it. So it is situational, by no means an amazing card, but being able to search your deck for George Stacy and get that card into play, especially early on, is really good. This essentially gives you 2 shots to get George Stacy in your opening hand, even because if this is in your opening hand, essentially George Stacy is in your opening hand. So really, really good card, and in terms of allowing you to search for George Stacy or get more mileage out of George Stacy. Next up, we have 3 copies of Phantom Flip. So this is a kind of like the other card we talked about. This is the threat removal version of it. So this is 2 cost event. Hero response thwart. After Ghost Spider uses a basic power, remove 5 threat from a scheme, max once per basic power use. So again, obviously very good for 2 cost. Removing 5 threat is a huge deal. You'll get things way under control in games. I certainly did in the games that I played. But again, it's going to be tied to the situational aspect of whether or not Ghost Spider is ready to be used. There are going to be times where she's not, and you're going to be frustrated because you have 1 or 2 of these in your hand and you just can't use them. You can't find a way to ready Ghost Spider to use them. But when you can, it just is going to allow you to do so much stuff. Again, this could be 4 damage and 5 threat removal. This could be, a 7 threat removal for 2 if you want to use 2 more threat removal thwarting on Ghost Spider itself. So lots of mileage. You have 3 copies of them. You're going to see them a bunch. They provide an energy resource as well if you need it, but really good card all around. All right, we have 2 copies of Pirouette and Punch. This may be my favorite card in her hero set of cards. It's hard to say. In the games I played, it just really, really came in handy. So this is a 2 cost event, Hero Interrupt. It will trigger her hero card power. When a card is revealed from the encounter deck, deal damage to the villain equal to 1 more than the number of boost icons on that card. Cancel that card's when revealed effects. You're canceling this entire card and redirecting it as damage based on the boost icons, and you can pick which card you want to use that on. So there's going to be times where a really powerful card comes out and you can base that has 3 boost icons, and you can cancel the entire card, not have anything affect you, and deal 3 damage on top of that for 2. So even just 3 damage for 2, I think we've seen that on cards. I can't remember if that's the Haymaker or what it is, but there are cards that do that. On top of that, canceling a treachery card is ridiculous. Like, that is such a good value for 2 on top of triggering your hero ability, because this is a hero interrupt. So this is such a powerful card. In every single game, I ended up using this card at least once, sometimes multiple times, and every single time it ended up being a really big swing in keeping the board under control, or getting it under control, or allowing me the time I needed to get it under control. So excellent card. Do not sleep on that one. Next, we have 2 copies of Web Binding. So this is a 2-cost event requirement of a mind resource when you play this out of the 2 costs. Hero Interrupt, when an enemy would activate, cancel that activation. If a minion's activation was canceled this way, deal 4 damage to that minion. If a minion's activation was canceled this way, you deal 4 damage to that minion. So you can cancel a villain activation, but that's all the card's going to do. So for 2, if it's a really bad attack or bad scheme coming your way that could end the game or could put you in a really a tough situation, for 2 to get rid of it, it's probably worth it. When you're able to hit a powerful minion this way, or cancel that activation completely and redirect it as 4 damage back to the minion, which a lot of times 4 damage may just kill the minion outright, it's really good. Kind of situational because of the requirement and the fact that you're going to mostly want to be hitting minions with this, and you're not always going to have those targets in play. But that being said, I definitely, even though I didn't use it every game, I definitely, when I used it, it was such a game changer, and especially on those big minions, just being able to potentially take them out, cancel an activation, all without having to have sacrificed anything on the turn that came previous, in terms of like you wasting an attack, dealing with that minion, whatever. You just can sort of wait till you can use this interrupt to do it on the villain's turn, the enemy's turn. So really, really good card. All right, George Stacy. We kind of alluded to this already. This is a 1-cost support. Events attached to George Stacy may be played as if they were in your hand. Action, exhaust George Stacy, attach 1 event from your hand face down here to a maximum of 3. So again, this is temporarily increasing your hand size based on the cards that are on here. So they function like they're in your hand. You can play them as if they were in your hand, and you're basically able to this way save events that otherwise you may not have been able to use because they just were situational, or you didn't have the resources that turn, or you just didn't want to play at that turn. And now you can store them on George Stacy, wait for an effective turn to play them without them taking up a card in your hand size. Cards like that are obviously really good. Getting George Stacy out early in the game is especially great because you're going to have situations early in the game where you might have a card that is, even the one I just mentioned, you might have Web Binding come out and a minion is not in play, and you think, I could use Web Binding to cancel the villain's activation, but what I would really like to do is put this card onto George Stacy and wait for a minion to enter play and then be able to use that after. That George Stacy allows that, so it's a really flexible card. It's going to allow for a lot of plays you otherwise wouldn't be able to do, but it really just depends on when you get it out. Again, the first time I played, I barely even got to test this card whatsoever because it ended up at the very bottom of my deck. I didn't get to use it. So again, getting it out early is key. You will have 2 chances to get it in your opening hand because of, I'm forgetting all the card names, but because of Parental Guidance, sort of just milling your deck for that card, you'll be able to search for it. So you will have a couple chances to get into your opening hand, and hopefully you do. All right, here's the big one. So this is Ticket to the Multiverse. 3-cost upgrade, action, remove Ticket from the Multiverse from the game, discard your hand, shuffle your discard pile into your deck, draw up to your hand size, and ready each Ghost Spider card you control. So you basically are resetting not resetting your board state, but resetting your deck and drawing up to a full hand. So, if this is if this card you played emptied your hand, you're now going to get essentially another turn this turn because you drop to your hand size and you're readying all your cards, so you get to use them all again too. So when you use this, especially, you don't want to use this early in the game. That's one of the reasons you can get it from your discard pile as your alter ego, and the reason that it has 2 wild resources. This is going to be used to play things for you for the majority of the game. And then at some point in the game, when you need to have a huge turn and you need to get the board under control, you're going to be able to have a massive 2-turn play where you also reset your deck using Ticket to the Multiverse, and it'll be gone, and that'll be your one use for the game. Such a powerful card. I knew it was going to be good. I don't think I realized how much of a game changer it could be. I think it was honestly when I was playing Sandman in the first scenario that I used this twice for the double wild resources. It helped me immensely getting cards played that otherwise I maybe wouldn't have been able to play, and then had this opportune moment where I was able to utilize my entire board, my entire kit that I had set up, do a bunch of damage, defeat a minion, get a side scheme under control, whatever the case may be, and then use Tickets to the Multiverse, reset the entire thing, have another turn, and then I was playing two-handed solo, so I was then jumping to Miles Morales and still having another turn. I did so much damage, so much control that turn that was basically what won me the game. And I love that there's this card that can do that, and that they found a way to make a situational card that you're going to want to use later in the game still valuable earlier on by offering you 2 wild resources. Do not sleep on the 2 wild resources that this offers. That's actually really, really useful and really good for requirements, for the fact that you're being able to play for a 2-cost card with a single card from your hand. The fact that you can get this back, you know, into your deck using the Alter Ego means that you're going to see this multiple times even before you want to use it. Really good card all around. One of my favorite cards in the hero set of cards for sure. And then finally, we have 2 copies of Web-Bracelet. So this is an awesome kit card. This is basically your main kit card. 2-cost upgrade, hero response. After you resolve an interrupt or responsibility on an event, which is the same trigger as your hero card, exhaust Web-Bracelet, draw 1 card, max 1 per event. So again, if you get 2 of these out, every single time you are triggering your hero ability that's you know, ready in Ghost Spider potentially, you're also going to be exhausting both of these and drawing 2 cards. So I got, in the first game I played, I actually had one come up in my opening hand, and my next hand I drew, I had another one come up. So I played most of the game with both of them out, and I felt so overpowered being able to use this with event cards, drawing extra cards, playing more than I needed to, using the wild resources on the Multiverse card and stuff like that to be able to play stuff as well. I was playing so many cards and having no problem finding ways to play cards that honestly, she doesn't have a huge kit in her hero cards like some heroes we've seen where you're boosting like attack and thwart and all that kind of stuff. But these 2 cards, if you can get them out, is going to shift the way you play Ghost Spider big time. So awesome card all around. All right, we're jumping into the protection cards, and there's some really, really solid ones here. So first one we're going to look at is Silk. This is a 2-cost ally with 2 health, 1 thwart, 1 attack. Response, after you play Silk from your hand, if you control another Web Warrior, I should have mentioned she's a Web Warrior, search the encounter deck for a Treachery and discard it. So it's pretty good, honestly, and it's just going to matter how many cards are left in the villain deck and, you know, what you're most fearing. Obviously, a really good target for this is... man, I'm having one of those days where I'm just having like random Shadows of the Past. That's the card I was looking for. I'm just having a random brain fog here. Obviously, any time that you want to go and just like, if you're worried about Shadows of the Past coming out or it's still in the deck and the deck's getting low, whatever the case may be, just being able to search the encounter deck for that and discard it is really solid in its own right. If this card just said 2 cost for a 2 health ally that just when you play it, find Shadows of the Past and discard it, it would be a phenomenal card. So the fact that it can do that and more, obviously really good, and it functions as a chump blocker on top of that. So it is really good, but again, you have to control another Web Warrior card. So this is one of those cards that's really activated by the fact that you're playing a Web Warrior deck. And I will preface that though by saying that having played this deck and with a bunch of Web Warriors and seeing the integrations, Web Warrior deck archetypes are going to be really, really strong, I think. And honestly, I'm having really like a lot more fun than I thought I would with this Web Warrior archetype. And this is just based on her deck that I've been playing. There's more cards we're going to be getting through this entire cycle that eventually we're going to have so many options on how we're going to build Web Warrior decks and for which aspects. But even just this protection one and the way that they integrated, there are some really powerful Web Warrior cards like Silk and like some other ones we'll get to here that I think is going to make this archetype really popular, especially if you're a Spider-Man fan. The thematics that are going to be great. So Silk is really, really good, and it's going to, but again, it just depends how many cards are left in the villain deck. If the villain deck is super low, you're probably, and you have this in your hand, it might just be one of those things where, yeah, you could play it, but you might find out there's no Treachery cards left, or there's none that you really want to discard, and at that point, you're just, you know, quickening the pace of that deck running through. So keep that in mind, but otherwise, a really solid card. Next up, we have Spider-Man Miles Morales as an ally. This is a 4-cost ally, 3 health, Web Warrior, 1 thwart, 2 attack. After you play Spider-Man from your hand, stun and confuse an enemy if you control at least 3 Web Warrior cards. So it's pretty steep in terms of 3 Web Warrior cards, keeping in mind that your identity will likely be a Web Warrior, so you're just required to have 2 other allies. I believe that this card itself counts because it says after you play Spider-Man, so he's already entered play. You now have a Web Warrior card in and of itself with this, so you really only have to have 1 other ally. Probably not too hard to hit if you're playing a Web Warrior deck, or you know, cards that are decks that have a bunch of Web Warrior cards in them. But and being able to stun and confuse an enemy of your choice, whether it's the villain, whether it's a minion, just by playing this card with also 3 health, with also 2 damage with a single consequential damage on that as well. Like, there's a lot going for this. It's a bit of a steep cost at 4, but generally in protection, getting allies out, especially ones that have this much flexibility, is probably really good for what you're trying to accomplish, especially if you're going to slow down the villain by confusing and stunning them. So overall, really good, and one of those cards that I think in Web Warrior decks, especially protection, obviously, is going to be really solid. Next up, we have Spider-Man UK. So this is a 3-cost ally with 5 health, 1 thwart, 2 attack, double consequential damage on the attack, interrupt when Spider UK defends against an attack, deal damage to the attacking enemy equal to the number of Web Warrior cards you control. This ended up being one of the all-stars of the games I played. I thought it was going to be good, but I guess I didn't anticipate how often I was going to have Web Warrior cards in play, and I think that almost every single time that I ended up playing this card, I had 3 Web Warrior cards in play, and so, like, minimum. And so having 3 Web Warrior cards in play means that I could take a hit of, 2 damage on him and deal 3 damage back as sort of a retaliate and still have him play because of his 5 health to do that again potentially, and maybe even another time depending on how you're utilizing or healing Spider UK up. So such a solid card. Honestly, one of my surprise cards of the deck, and I think that in Web Warrior decks based on protection, which I think is the archetype that I'm going to have the most fun building Web Warrior decks with because protection is my favorite aspect. This is going to be a card I'm always going to include. You just never wouldn't include this in a protection Web Warrior deck, I don't think, because it's just a solid card all around in that archetype. Really, really good card. 3 copies of Jump Flip. So Jump Flip is a 1-cost event. Hero Interrupt. It will trigger off the hero ability of Ghost Spider. Defense, when you would take any amount of damage, prevent 2 of that damage, and if you paid for this card using an energy resource, remove 2 threat from the main scheme as well on top of that. Really solid card. It's not amazing by any means. It's one that I often use as a resource because I want to do other things, but for only 1 cost, and you're only going to play it when you're going to hit that trigger. If you're not going to hit the trigger of using the energy resource, it's probably not worth it to use it unless you really do not want to take 2 damage, which granted could happen, but it's probably not the way you want to spend your resources. But if you're able to spend a single resource, energy resource from your hand to do 2 damage and remove 2 threats, that's pretty good management of your resources and value for what you're playing. Again, it's just situational with the energy resource and wanting to use that resource for that and potentially slow down the next turn you're going to have. So not necessarily a card that's going to automatically be included in protection, but again, protection, finding ways to remove threat while doing protecting, defending, which is something it already wants to be doing, is just really good, especially if you're playing solo and you kind of have to manage all these things by yourself. It's a really solid card. Return the Favor, one of my favorite new cards for protection in here for sure. So 0-cost event, discard cards from the top of the encounter deck until you discard a treachery, reveal that treachery, deal 5 damage to the villain. This ends up being dealing 5 damage for 0, and all you have to do is take a treachery card. Really, the downsides you have to watch out for here is if you just get really unlucky and you have to discard 10 cards off the top of the deck to get to a treachery card, which means you're cycling through the villain deck a little bit quicker, meaning that you might get acceleration tokens added on because you might get through all the cards. But taking a single treachery card, generally in my experience, sometimes they sucked and sometimes I had to manage them a little bit, but it never ended up putting me in too bad of a position, and I just did 5 damage for 0. There was times I had 2 of these in my hand, I played them both, I did 10 damage for 0, and I just had to take 2 treachery cards. I think it's 100% worth it, especially when you're playing protection solo and you need to find ways to do damage while still, defending and keeping your hero alive and everything. So I love it. I honestly think I'm going to be including this card in a lot of protection builds I do because of my style of playing and wanting to be able to do damage while also protecting. And you can easily build around the fact that, hey, I'm going to be taking these extra treachery cards in the same way we've seen other cards where you have to take, villain attacks and things like that. You have to do it to the villain, but again, that's something you're probably going to be wanting to do anyways. You have to win the game, you got to do damage to the villain. 5 damage is a nice chunk for 0. Really solid card. Lastly, we have What Doesn't Kill Me. This is a 2-cost event. Requirement when you play it is a single strength resource. Hero action, heal do damage from your hero, ready your hero. This is a good card. I honestly found that out of everything I was doing, this ended up being the one that most often I had to just sort of not play it. There was too many other cards I wanted to be playing that this sort of just didn't make the cut a lot of the time. So I would say that it really is dependent on how much you need to heal that 2 damage. Are you in such a dire strait but you are in a position you also don't want to switch to Alter Ego, or it's going to slow you down too much that healing 2 damage is worth it to spend the resources, this card and 2 others, so 3 cards from your hand to heal that 2 damage, with the caveat that you also have to ready your hero. Is that going to give you enough mileage, or do you realize that for that 3 cost you can do something entirely different, like put an ally into play to help protect you, or play an event from your hand that's going to do more damage? Often I could just find other things I wanted to do, and the 2 damage and readying wasn't a huge deal. But I will say one really good thing with Ghost Spider, and it did happen to me once, is if you do run into those situations where Ghost Spider is already exhausted and you can't use her cards that say when you activate a basic power, this is another option to ready Ghost Spider to make her now available to use those cards. But again, you've spent 3 cards to use this. Hopefully you have enough cards remaining in your hand to be able to still play those cards that you want to play. So good card, and nothing phenomenal in my experience that I play, obviously, but I used it a couple times in the games that I played. Okay, we're going into the basic cards, and we're starting with what may be one of my new favorite basic allies in the game. It is situational. It is only going to be tied to Web Warriors, but in those archetypes, I cannot see a situation where I'm not going to include this card in the deck, because it is just so phenomenally good in my experience. Again, and some chance for it not to hit. I'm talking too much about getting into the card. Let's get into the card. 3-cost ally. Sorry, this is Spider-Man, Hobie Brown. It's like a rock star Spider-Man. I had no idea this character existed. 3-cost ally, 3 health, 2 thwart, 1 attack, 2 consequential damage on the thwart. You can only play this if you control a Web Warrior card. Interrupt: when Spider-Man leaves play, discard 3 cards, top 3 cards of the encounter deck. Deal damage to the villain equal to the number of boost icons discarded this way. Maybe I just got lucky. I don't know, but every single time I played this, almost every game I played, because of how effective it was the first game, I just wanted to keep having it in play. I almost never used it for the resource. Every single time this would leave play, so I would put this into play, I would use it to take a big hit and do a big block with Spider-Man, lose this, discard 3 cards, and I was always hitting 5 or 6 boost icons based on drawing cards that have 3 boost icons. And for sure it's possible, you draw 0, 0, and 1, you only do 1 damage, but the potential to do 4 damage, 5 damage, I would say 4 damage on average, discarding 3 cards is probably pretty likely. Even if you just say you're doing 4 damage or 3 damage for this leaving play, and you took a hit for 3, I mean, it ends up being pretty darn good, especially because you have the flexibility to use the attack, use the thwart. You can thwart, take 2 consequential damage, and then also soak up a hit, and then also do damage back. There's so much flexibility in this card, and it ended up being such a champion in the games I played, because I always had a Web Warrior in play, and it was always, the condition was fine. It just, I think they've only put that on there to really limit it from being included across like the entire scope of the game. But what a surprise, phenomenal card. I love that it's basic. It's gonna make it into pretty much every one of my Web Warrior decks that I make. I'm really excited to try it across the gamut after we've seen all these different heroes come out in the cycle. Awesome card. All right, next up we have Across the Spider-Verse. This is a 2-cost event, max 1 per deck. Hero action: exhaust a Web Warrior card you control, search your discard pile for a Web Warrior ally, and put it into play. Then choose a player. That player may spend 3 resources of any type to repeat this ability. This is a surprisingly good card. Think of it this way. I mean, even if you don't trigger that other player using the ability, you're basically, for your hero action, exhausting a Web Warrior card you control to put a Web Warrior card from your discard pile into play for free. There are some cards that we've gone over even here today that are, 3 or 4 costs, that playing those for free just because you exhaust one in play is really, really worth it. I mean, yeah, there might be situations where, you don't want, or exhausting a Web Warrior card is going to get you into a bind, or, you don't have one or something. But generally, if you're playing this in a Web Warrior deck, I can't see a situation where you're not going to have an easy time doing this. For 2, that is really worth it, because again, if you're playing like a 3-cost ally or 4-cost ally, you've essentially gotten a discount of 2 or a discount of 1 on them. Really, really good as it stands. But even having the option to now say another player can pay 3, they have to pay more than you paid. I mean, I guess not really, because you played 2 and then this card. So they're playing 3 cards to do the same thing. I mean, you can jack up your entire board depending on how many players are in the game. The fact that they can replay that ability, that is super good, and you get a wild resource on the corner as well to use. So overall, really good card. I used this a bunch when I played. I didn't always hit the choosing another player to do the ability, but often just getting the discount off some of the more expensive allies in the game was really, really worth it, especially when they were in my discard pile, because when they come up previously, I wasn't able to play them, but now I wanted to play them. Really flexible card. I really, really like it. Next up, we have a team up card. This will be in both decks. This is Young Love, 1-cost event, team up Gwen Stacy and Miles Morales, max 1 per deck. Alter ego action, heal 3 damage from both Gwen Stacy and Miles Morales. Solid card for one. You do have to be in alter ego form, and so does the other character as well that's on the team up. So even when I was playing two-handed solo, there were times when I had one in alter ego and one not, and it just was like, okay, I'm basically just paying 1 to heal for 3. How badly do I want to heal right now? If I'm in alter ego, I'm going to be recovering anyways. Do I need the extra 3? It's not quite as powerful as I'd like it to be, but the fact that it does hit both, there was a game where I was able to recover with both, hit them with both with another 3, and I came back to my hero form much more prepared than I maybe would be. Again, not quite as powerful as I was maybe hoping for a team-up card to be, but still useful when it aligns, when the stars align for it. All right, Web of Life and Destiny. This is a 3-cost support. It's a location, and the location has the Web Warrior trait as well, which is important because it will count for some of the cards that say if you have a Web Warrior card in play or how many you have in play. So keep that in mind. Ignore this card's resource cost completely, the 3-cost, if your identity has the Web Warrior trait. If you're playing this card and you don't have the Web Warrior trait, it would make no sense to me. You're generally going to have the Web Warrior trait. I guess that really matters if you're in alter ego form compared to hero form. But really, this was always free for me. So you can almost ignore that cost. And this is a free card. Response on it: after a Web Warrior ally leaves play, choose a player, that player draws a card. So from now on, you basically play this card for free, and from now on, anytime a Web Warrior ally leaves play, which you're probably gonna have a lot of if you're playing this card, you're drawing a card. So for instance, that Rocker Spider-Man version that we just looked at, not only when you block with that and he dies, not only are you gonna trigger his ability to do the boost icons and deal damage, now you're also gonna draw a card on top of that. Solid card. The fact that it's free, I mean, how do I even argue this? If you're playing a Web Warrior deck, put that card in there, hope you get it out early, and at some point you're gonna have a Web Warrior ally die, and now you're getting free card draw. You cannot go wrong with that. Awesome card. They're doing so many things to power up Web Warrior decks that I really think they're gonna be some of the best decks we're gonna see in this cycle, and maybe all around. I'm just super excited when we get more of these Spider-Man hero packs out to be able to see the whole gamut of what we have and just see what we can build, because I'm really excited about this archetype. And then the last basic one we're going to look at is Plan B. 1-cost upgrade, play under any player's control, max of 1 per player. Hero action: exhaust Plan B and discard 1 random card from your hand, deal 2 damage to an enemy. This may seem, just like, not flashy, but I will tell you, I'm surprised at how much damage I was able to deal with this and how effective it ended up being. Yes, it says you have to discard a random card, but what I would always do is I would always just use this at the end of my turn when I only have 1 card left in my hand, or I have 2 cards that I don't really care about. I'm planning to discard them anyways. So even though it's random, I really wasn't caring too much that it was random. It almost never affected me. And so dealing 2 damage every single turn by just exhausting this, especially if you get it out early, this could be an extra 2 damage every single turn. If you have 10 turns, thinking that's 20 damage right there. Like, this adds up quickly. Getting Plan B out, there's a reason it's max 1 per player. If this was not max 1 per player, you would have so much damage being dealt. It would be nuts. But again, you can play this under any player's control, so you can be stacking up your allies with this as well. So, not your allies, the other teammates, I should say, as well. Really solid card. I think I found myself sleeping on that card after first reading it. I didn't think too much of it until I got it into play and realized this ended up being like one of the champions of these games that I'm playing by how much damage it's dealing. So really solid card with Plan B. Honestly, the basic cards in this deck were really, really good. Okay, and then we're getting into the obligation card. This is Worried Father. Interesting one here. So this is give to the Gwen Stacy player, search your deck, hand, and discard pile, and play area for George Stacy and set him aside. Attach this obligation to him. Alter ego action: exhaust Gwen Stacy and remove this obligation from the game, and then add George Stacy to your hand. The reason I say this is interesting is because if George Stacy is in play, sure, you're losing essentially the events that are attached to George Stacy because it's going to go back to your hand. George Stacy isn't, then you're going to have to discard the events. And you're having to spend an alter ego action and exhaust Gwen Stacy to be able to get George Stacy back. Otherwise, he's just going to remain out of the game forever. If George Stacy is not in your play area, or even in your hand, if it's in the discard pile or in your deck, this is another way to get George Stacy, and you get to choose whenever you want to add him to your hand by just exhausting your alter ego. That's actually good. That's not a bad thing. Just being able to say, I've taken a card out of my deck, put George Stacy aside, and whenever I want George Stacy, when I'm in alter ego form, I just exhaust my alter ego and I get George Stacy. Sure, you can't recover then, and sure, it may be slowing down certain things, but I think you could argue that there's some positivity in this card, that it's not nearly even close to some of the worst obligations we've seen. In some cases, this might actually be a good thing for you. So overall, in my case, I had one time where it hit with George Stacy in play, and I was upset that I lost the events that were attached to him, but every other time, I was like, okay, it affected my board in no negative way whatsoever. All right, let's get into the Nemesis minion. This is the Lizard. 1 scheme, 3 attack, 5 health, forced interrupt. When the villain phase begins, heal 1 damage from the Lizard. That's basically it. So I think there's only one game. I did pretty good in all my test runs of not getting Shadows of the Past out too much, but in the one game that this came out, I don't think I even noticed that the Lizard was healing. I was healing him, but I think he only stayed out 2 turns, and that 1 damage he healed wasn't a big deal. I mean, really, you could look at it as, if you get rid of Lizard in 2 turns, you could just say he has 6 health then, because you're having to do an extra damage because he's going to heal 1. It's honestly not that big of a deal. The fact that he does 3 attack means that you're probably going to want to get rid of him somewhat soon after he gets out, otherwise that 3 attacks is incoming every single turn. But overall, we've seen a lot tougher villains out there. There's not anything that's going to, really wreck your entire game state with him coming out. The side scheme is Regenerative Research. This is a side scheme, says force interrupt. When the villain phase begins, heal 1 damage from each enemy. Now this sucks. This one is way more of a nuisance than the Lizard, because it's every enemy in play, and it has 5 threat that you need to get rid of in order to have it exit play. So healing 1 damage from every enemy, sure, if it's just the villain out, yeah, that means you can probably deal with that. But if you have a bunch of minions in play and you're trying to get rid of them, and you're dealing damage across a few of them and never killing them, 1 damage healing across everything could really suck. So some situations you might say, oh, it's fine, I can leave that out. In other situations, you're going to want to get rid of that as soon as possible. A little bit more of a scary card than I think the Lizard, in my opinion. Then we have Experimental Injection. This is an attachment that says attach to the minion with the most remaining hit points. If you can't, this card gains Surge, so it's essentially if you have no minions in play. Attached minion gains the creature trait and gets +4 hit points. I have not, I'm trying to remember, did I see something with the creature trait in the campaign? I don't think I have yet, but I could be forgetting. Some of it's becoming a blur to me today. So I'm not 100% sure if that creature trait is something that, over time we're going to see come up in more, encounter sets and things that come out, that eventually that'll be more of a detriment. But really the big thing here is that he gets +4 hit points. So a minion that already has a lot of hit points, because it's the most hit points that's on the current board state, that you may have already been having a hard time to deal with, is now going to be even harder to get rid of. That could be really bad depending on what minion it lands on. It could be, not a huge deal if it lands on something that, you didn't even necessarily want to prioritize right now anyways. So just a situational card that you may hate sometimes, and other times will be fine. Lastly, 2 copies of the Treachery in Cold Blood. So when revealed, the Lizard attacks you. You cannot play events until after this attack resolves. If no attack was made this way, essentially if Lizard was not in play, this card gains Surge. So again, this is if Lizard is in play, he's getting extra attack. He has base 3 attack, so it's a big attack coming your way, and you cannot use events during this attack to sort of interrupt or prevent that damage, or mitigate that damage until after that attack actually gets through, which means you're going to be taking that 3 damage in some shape or form. That could be a bad treachery card if you're in a situation where you just cannot be taking 3 damage. It could be manageable and not too big of a deal if you're not. So again, it's kind of situational. Nothing here in those cards I think is overly, destructive unless you happen to be in those situations where it's going to be. That is the entire pack, or the entire hero that comes in this expansion. So I love Ghost Spider. I honestly think that every single game I played with her, I had such a blast, and I think in part, one of the big reasons of that is I love the Web Warrior archetype so much. I can't stress that enough. Maybe it's just me. I'd be really curious to hear from you guys that have played it. If you're also resonating with the Web Warrior, and I'm just the general consensus I want to see, like, is everyone thinking it's really powerful? Is everyone enjoying that archetype? I don't know if it's just me or if it just fits my playstyle, but I am loving the Web Warriors so much because I find them so darn strong that now I'm really curious to build a Web Warrior deck more effectively without just these base cards as we get more, and then go back to some other, you know, the Guardians of the Galaxy Most One campaign, and Ronin and things like that, and Thanos, and try some of these scenarios again and see how much easier or different they are based on how strong I'm finding this archetype to be. So Ghost Spider is really good. I find that sometimes her hero cards, with the having to trigger off playing or using your basic power, sometimes there are, more often than I was expecting, I should say, there was times where I just could not trigger those cards because she was already exhausted, and so they were just sort of dead cards in my hand, which is really disappointing because they are really powerful cards. But it didn't happen enough to really hamper my experience with Ghost Spider. Overall, I really, really enjoy this hero. I think it's going to be one of my go-tos when I want to do a protection Web Warrior archetype, because she has 3 defense, and because her ability will trigger in the villain phase with some of those cards as well, being able to ready after you've already defended with her. So lots of potential here. I really am a fan of this deck, and if you're a protection fan especially, I think you're going to gravitate towards Ghost Spider, maybe over some of the other Web Warriors we see, because she has such a strong defense value. So let me know what you think of Ghost Spider in your experience playing so far. What did you think of the Web Warrior archetype? What do you think of Ghost Spider in general? And if you're really curious what I think of Spider-Man Miles Morales, stick around for on the channel for tomorrow, or subscribe, especially if you are not subscribed, because you'll get a notification when it gets posted, because I will have my Miles Morales thoughts and my whole review there. And then again next weekend, probably on Sunday or Monday, depending on how much time I need to play through everything, I will give you my full thoughts on the entire box and actually compare both heroes and let you know which one's my favorites, and you know, how I think they compare and what the value of the overall box is in general. So thanks so much for watching. I'm really excited to be able to bring you this content and get more Marvel Champions content in my hands. If you're not already on our Discord, you want to chat with us there, we have a Marvel Champions channel there, we have board game channels, we have online gaming channels, we have, you know, regular life and pets channels, lots of stuff to talk about. We'd love to have you join and talk to you there. Otherwise, thanks so much for watching. See you next time.